Well, Vivek, thanks for helping me with my project. So, what is all this about? You were asking. I actually started the project back in December because I work from home, and it was meant as a cure and prevention to social distancing. Because I was planning to do all these interviews in person,
Okay.
so I thought, hey, take something that you're passionate about that might be interesting to talk to people about.
Yeah.
And so my plan was to go and talk to people at the coffee shop, on the street, at the mall, just random people. But with
Right.
COVID-19, I've had to be a little bit more flexible. So now I'm bugging all my
This,
friends and family.
this might actually be more efficient.
Maybe.
No.
No,
Yeah.
it's definitely efficient. But it doesn't help with like learning to talk to strangers or kind of expanding your social circles, because your online people that you know are probably not that different than you are.
True. I was reading this article last week. It's by a German philosopher who's talking about impact of COVID on education, right? So one of the arguments that he's making is, and I think I've been talking about that a little bit myself, is at the end of the day, we've grown up in the last 30 years or 40 years. One of the things that people have told us, well, you need to have these social skills, you need to learn how to work with people, you need to learn how to work with multicultural teams, all of that, right? It is very possible that a lot of the education that will happen in the next 20 years will happen online or remotely, or just live, even if it's virtual, maybe live, right? You could have a generation of students who come out and say, everything that I do and everything I can do, even professionally, I can do it remotely. So this argument that you need to have social skills could itself be challenged. I don't know why do I need to have the skills, right? I mean, so dramatic as it might sound, I mean, you are going to be people who will say, I can be highly successful in whatever I do by enhancing some of my technical skills rather than my soft skills. I mean, should you really care about my soft skills? I mean, well, I don't know. Of course, we grew up kind of thinking about it very differently, right? So who knows? Who knows? I think the world is yet to see what the new normal is going to be. Hmm.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I think you could definitely be successful without having to be in person with people. But there's definitely soft skills involved, even with virtual
Different
meetings.
soft skills. I think, yeah, I think the point was different soft skills, right? I mean, right? So maybe
But
not table manners, for example. I don't know. You don't order an Argentinian Malbec when you are sitting with a French guy like that. So.
right, yeah, no, you don't have to worry about the onions on your salad bugging your boss,
Yeah, yeah,
which that's actually happened to me. But
yeah.
anyway,
Really? Okay. Yeah.
um, but you know, so you could be successful without going up to people in person. But I mean, there's also like the digital divide as well, right? I mean, if you deal with people only online, then there's a large part of the population that's sort of invisible to you. Um,
At at the moment, right? So at the moment, but what happens in a situation where every room has cameras and you live the life of, wasn't it that Jim Carrey movie about, right? I mean, you're living the life on, right? So anybody who wants to see you or talk to you, right? I mean, there's no need to even set up meetings. You just, you go to your screen or look for that screen and you log in, and that's, then you see Vivek. Uh, who knows? Yeah. Yeah, so I was
because
watching. It's when you get a chance. I think watch Minority Report. I mean, the movie that was like. I mean, some of it. I will not be surprised that if there are people, right, who 20 years ago watched that movie and over the last 20 years built stuff based on that, or at least dreamt some of it and that came true. So who knows where the inspiration would come from? Hmm.
Indeed, I've interviewed a few people like on the street. I think they were homeless, but who knows? And it's been kind of interesting to kind of use this as like a reason to reach out to people that you wouldn't normally interact with.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I agree. I agree. Let's talk a little bit more, and then depending on what kind of folks you're looking for or connecting with, I'm happy to kind of set up some time with I mean, you can contact them. I can introduce you to some people who might not be in your sphere at the moment.
that would be fantastic. I have
Yeah,
many days. I'm doing one interview per day till the end of 2024, which means I have 1,600 and some odd days to do. So
really.
my my sphere is this big, and that number I
Hmm.
gave you is much bigger than that. So I could use a lot of
Yeah,
help in filling the gap.
not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, the overall the framework is in 2024 we're supposed to be landing people on the moon again. NASA is, and the first question is, did you know about this?
Yes. Hang on. So let me caveat that. I learned about it post you setting up this call. I was just googling stuff about that. And plus, with the recent SpaceX, those guys going up in space. I've been having this kind of discussions with folks saying, what's what's the what's the number that I'm ready to spend, in a sense, to be one of those two people, right? Or one of the 20 people, depending on, right? I mean, um, and I think there is a number. I mean, I think there is a certain amount I would be ready to give to make that trip. Today, if let's pick a number. So today it could be $100,000, depend because of what I earn or what I have today. But 3, 4, 5 years from now, it could be $500,000, right? I mean, I think it'll end up becoming really a proportion uh, um, of my wealth, in a sense. Um, but there is, I mean, there will be a number that I'll say I'm ready to give up for that experience. I mean, absolutely, absolutely. Mm.
And are you familiar with SpaceX's development of the Starship that they're doing down in Boca Chica near the Brownsville?
No, no. Mm.
So this is a 100% reusable vehicle that will be able to carry 100 people at a time to space. And they're actually thinking they can make 3 trips a day with one vehicle. All you have to do is pay for the fuel and be able to have a factory down there that's able to produce 2 of these a week. So you're talking about a truly fundamental shift in terms of scale.
Yeah.
And
And where would they go, or is it going up and coming down? Huh.
so they're thinking that this vehicle would be multi-purpose. One way that they're thinking about funding it
Right.
is by using it for point-to-point travel on Earth. So you could go from, say, Houston to
Um,
Tokyo in like 30 minutes. Now, you might need a week to recover, but you could do it
yeah.
in.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think the question will start to becoming about what it does to your body, right? I mean, I think I get that there's certain amount of fitness that is needed. I understand that, and then I think I suspect if I try and sign up for it, irrespective of how much money I give, I think my fitness will disqualify me. But I would even make the argument, just for that purpose, maybe getting fit might be worth it. Or fitter might be worth it. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I didn't know this, so that's interesting. And
well,
yeah,
and they're also thinking the same vehicle could also take people to orbit, could launch
yeah,
huge satellites or large constellations of satellites, take people to the moon, take people to Mars. Like Elon wants to build a city
incredible.
on Mars,
Yeah,
um, like 1 million people by 2050. So,
yeah. I mean, uh, I guess when you talk about dreaming big, that's dreaming big. Yeah, so no, I didn't know about it, but now I'm going to read up a little bit more about it then. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Last Wednesday they were supposed to launch the astronauts to the International Space Station. My son and I actually drove out there on the Tuesday before, so we left on Tuesday,
Oh,
got there, and then we couldn't stay, so we came back that Friday just to watch the launch on TV on Saturday. So.
uh, my cousin, she stays in Tampa, so um, so she saw it. I mean, not she didn't go there, but she's even from their house, from the beach, they were able to see it go, not go up all the way, but once it was up in a sense, right? So yeah, it's incredible. I mean, just the more you read, and I'm not, I'm not, I would, I'm certainly not a big space fan. That means be clear, right? But whenever I read about it, I hear about it, or see something that's in the news, so that's pretty fascinating. I have to say that, yeah. And every time I go to NASA, anytime somebody comes to town, NASA is pretty much always a visit. And it never fails to fascinate me. I think that's the right word. There's always something new happening. It's in the whole story is incredible about what man is able to do.
But when you think out way in the future, like 500 years, do you see humanity expanding beyond Earth and having bases on the moon, cities on Mars, colonies on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn? Do you think that's realistic, or do you think humanity's just on Earth still?
Um, I'm always just generally in life. I think about I always think about it in terms of glass half full. And the fact of the matter is that if you'd asked people 10 years ago, for example, that you would have a private car manufacturer saying, "I'm going to send people up to the space station," most people would have said it's crazy to think about it. Um, somehow, somehow technology has moved so quickly in the last, I would maybe say, last 10, 15 years, that and the pace at which these disruptions have come, the gap between these disruptions have been shorter and shorter, right? And, first time people talk about the first revolution, the green revolution, the manufacturing revolution, they were spread over 30 years, then 20 years, 10 years. But if you just think about the last 20 years, they probably have been 10 such instances, and it keeps getting shorter, which basically means that we probably, if you say 2050, for example, or 2300, pick a date, I think the number of life altering or just disruptive to the way we've always thought about the number of changes that are going to happen, that does not seem that far. I mean, you've already reached the point in which you have a space station, right? So that's part one. Now it's a question of um, how do you get that to say a stationary planet, depending on what chemicals are available for in terms of breathing and stuff like that. But not surprised. I will not. I would not bet against it. Is what I would say. I would not. I would put money on it. I would put money that there will be more than one planet that's dominated by, or that's occupied by human beings. I think
But
aliens. If you tell me that they're alien stuff, and that I'm not there yet. But like they say, the absence of proof is not the proof of absence, right? So, but I'm not there yet.
But you talk about the disruptions coming more frequently, and you definitely see with the iPhone and Facebook and things like this. But you also see sort of technology reach a plateau, and then kind of get stuck at that level. I mean, just from like household appliances, for example, I'm still taking clothes from the washer and putting them into the dryer, and I see nothing on the horizon to kind of remove that sort of thing.
But I think some of it is also about just a combination of need and ambition, right? I mean, um, uh, so I think if you think about, say, let's talk about the dryer washer, right? I think uh, I, I'm, I might be wrong, but I think the washer came first, the dryer came later. It was like you wash and then you put it out to dry, right? When space kind of reduced in terms of the space you had to dry your clothes, or weather that did not allow clothes to dry that easily, you ended up having, a heat generated machine that would allow to do that. I think I think the evolution on that one will become speed, right? I mean, today you're talking about, let's say it takes a 40-minute cycle and then a 30-minute dryer. Maybe it'll happen in 20 minutes. Maybe it'll happen in 5. I think that will be the next kind of thing. Um, Clothes have evolved to suit that, right? I mean, you've now started to have non-wrinkled clothes, for example. So people say just use washer dryer, hang it, and you're ready to wear. I, I think that will evolve, because I don't think they're quite there. Most shirts are not there, even though they claim to be wrinkle free or whatever. But um, that's part one. The second thing I think is, I do not. I mean, I would love to have this particular conversation about what's the next thing for a dryer and a washer with somebody who, say, works at Samsung, uh, because when you sell. I think the next thing that will happen, if it's not already happening, is, and I'm just thinking aloud, is it being wireless, right? I mean, so I'm sitting in my bedroom. As far as the clothes are there, I'm able to run it through my app and saying run it, right? And um, but I think it'll be. I think your point about this particular point would be interesting to see people who are in this area, right? I mean, so. You think about, I mean, but that's part one. The second thing is this whole idea um, about reaching for the stars. I think it applies to whatever people are doing in their own sphere. It's just a matter of how far of the vision is, right? And I think I guess that's why we think about whether it's Steve Jobs, or I would make the argument even our friends at Tesla, um, to be visionaries, right? I mean, why would things that you and I did not think about, and very often think, "Damn, it seems pretty straightforward. I don't know what the big deal was." And I think the iPod is the biggest example. At the end of the day, if you think about all the, iPod is basically a hard drive with headphones. I mean, that's what it was, right? I mean, and we've had hard drives for 20 years. How difficult was it for somebody to plug in a headphone into that hard drive? And have it play, right? So it seems straightforward when we think about it, but these things happen that way, right? I mean, I think about artificial intelligence today because I work in that space. Some of this stuff, I mean, I keep saying, I wish I knew these things when I was, say, at Hewlett Packard, 7 years ago. I would have been a star there. But that said, that technology was not there, right? I mean, you think about what we are doing around AI. It really is not rocket science. At the end of the day, you are taking enough data to determine a trend, and then saying that instead of a human being activating a certain feeling or activating a certain action based on the trend, you have a machine doing it. So um, I not I don't get the sense that we are anywhere close to the plateau when it comes to space. Uh, um, also because it's, at the moment, it is frightfully expensive, right? I mean, uh, to I think you'll start to see a lot more investment if there is, if to your point of view, if the cost of moving people from here to Tokyo is today, let's say, will cost, in 30 minutes, it will cost me $50,000. Let's pick a number, right? I think there's going to be enough investment there to bring that cost down to $6,000, right? So that people say, yeah, this is worth it, right? And that will propel the next wave of forward thinking. I don't know about plateau. I mean, since I've not thought about it in those terms, um, uh, but just across the across humankind, I feel we're constantly surprised by what we are able to achieve, right? And very often there's a small group of people who've kind of had this vision for it, and then they found another small group of people who were able to execute on that vision. So I'm not there yet of saying that we are anywhere close to a plateau. I mean, we keep thinking about the iPhone, right? I mean, I think iPhone is a good example, right? We keep thinking about what more can a phone now do, right? I mean, and you keep saying, at some stage, Apple is, I don't know, scamming us by coming up with this new, little bit fancier version, but really does not do something different. And now you're starting to see there's this conversation about checking for temperatures, checking for diabetes, checking for, so then it becomes a medical device, right? And then suddenly it's a new sphere, new ball game altogether. The platform might be the same. So to that point, the concept that you need, jet fuel to propel a ship or propel a rocket and at a certain space, that might be standard. How you use it and how you deploy it, and in the sense use cases for that concept could vary. And like you said, like you can go to Japan or you can go to the moon, right? I mean, so there's still some. I think there's still some way to go before people say, I think we've reached where we could. But I think nothing in our history says that will be the case where people will say, I'm happy. It's this fundamental two things. I think fundamental drive to hopefully reach for the next thing, or just greed, right? That combination is there, right? I mean, there's greed to, okay, where do I get my next billion from, right? And then I need to think about it, and that forces that, instead of saying I'm happy with the status quo, my life is good. So so long answer, but that's how I'm thinking about the question about plateauing.
Yeah, I think the plateau could be looked at in two different ways. One is, you've reached the absolute maximum that you can do in that area, and there's no place to go. And I think in everything that we've ever been involved in with humans, we are so far away from reaching the fundamental limits that there is no plateauing. But what I see instead is we've come to accept certain limitations, and that things have been the same way. We sort of trained ourselves to create our own limits as opposed to constantly pushing the envelope. And I guess what I'm wondering is, do you see the same thing? And then what would be required to kind of like remove those limitations on our mind, society, and ability?
I don't think it's going to be a question of ability. I think it's going to be a question of need and desire, right? I mean, I think, for example, right? I mean, we're talking about the pandemic that we're going through. That is forcing a certain behavior and a certain amount of innovation across the companies, right? I think that's going to drive it. I, at the end of the day, I think when human beings accept it, I don't think they accept it because they are, in absolute terms, satisfied with so let's take the washing machine example, right? If one makes the argument that the innovation to that concept is reaching a point where you can't do too much more, and in the sense that I'm happy with this. Some of it is also driven by, first of all, I don't know what the next thing is, right? So I don't know whether that would appeal. But the second thing is, is the whole at the end of the, I think about finite resources, right? And say, if I have finite resources, am I okay with a 43-minute cycle, wash cycle, right? If I had infinite resources, and somebody said it takes 43 minutes, I would say I want it done in 20, right? And that will force somebody to think about what does it take to get it done in 20, right? Um, uh, I, I think, and that was my thing about. There are going to be some movements in technology that will happen because of need, right? And need, and then there'll be some movement that will happen on account of um, just sheer ambition for people to leave a mark in their lifetime, right? I mean, so. And then I think the space piece probably at the moment sits certainly in the latter, right? I mean, one could make the argument: why do I need to go to? Why do I need to have a colony in Mars, right? You're making that argument, and today, if Elon Musk says, okay, I've made a colony in Mars, it will cost you, I don't know, $5 million from here to go there and live over there, right? A large majority of people might say, nah, I'm happy where it is. I would love to know how many of them are billionaires who can casually afford it, and also say, no, I don't want to try it, right? I mean, so but if that price, for example, comes down to $50,000, then you'll have people saying, you know, the pollution that I'm living in, or the traffic that I today have, that's unacceptable, and therefore I'm ready to spend that money and go to Mars. So I think that will drive. So I think it starts with just um, just a dream and an ambition of somebody to influence mankind, right? I mean, you think about and we keep going back to that whole idea of visionaries. I think that's where it starts, and it becomes then once you kind of achieve that, then it's a question of greed for them, because now you want to make you want to do the next thing, and for that you need money, and in order to satisfy your greed to make it available, you need to satisfy a certain need of people. So it, just thinking aloud, I'm thinking that's how the tier would end up being.
Yeah, and I mean, Elon talks about the cost he feels like he has to get it to make a Mars colony viable is you need to be around $500,000, because that's about the amount that you could liquidate everything you have here, and most like middle class people could actually come up with that amount of money. Of course,
Yeah.
With the recent actions by the Fed and what have you, $500,000 may very soon be $50 million.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's always going to be that tiering, right? I mean, I have always have this analogy around education in India. Every year when we have these annual board exams before people go into college, there's a hue and cry about how today my son cannot get into a good college even when they get 99%. In my times, if you got 92%, you could get into the college. My argument is, at the end of the day, it's always relative. At the end of the day, the top 1% got 92% and they got into the top 1% colleges. Today the top 1% gets 99, and therefore those are the ones who get into college. It's no different from what it was 20 years ago. It's at the end of the day, the number of seats colleges have, and what is the number that satisfies the number of seats that that need to be filled. It's not different, right? So when that 500,000 becomes 5 million or 50 million, they will still be middle class at that point of time for 50 million. Then the higher class will be talking about it in trillions. It's I don't think that's going to change. It's not like that suddenly all the middle class become millionaires and therefore they become part of that 1%. We can't, right? I mean, mathematically they can't.
I know with
But you're absolutely right that it become affordable, right?
inflation, the term T-bill might have a completely different meaning. You know,
Totally. Yeah. Yep. I agree.
$1 trillion bill instead
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
treasury bill.
Mm.
So we're at the top of the hour. Do you still have some time, or?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. We can talk.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, also it's another thing is college actually unleashing the potential of people today, or is it just training people to sort of go along with an existing system, being better at taking tests, being able to absorb and regurgitate information, as opposed to really developing skills that allow for them to contribute?
I mean, I've I've had pretty strong, honestly, one of the areas I've had strong views in life has been around education, and I think it has been a struggle. I think it has been a struggle because um institutions have not moved ahead with times. I think a lot of them have taken the idea of whether it is history or whether it is just the tradition of colleges too far, and I think that has impacted uh, the preparedness of people when they get out of college. Right. Mm, I think today, for example, let's take like India or China or some of the developing countries as an example. Um, Anybody who pretty much a large section of people all graduate, right? So graduate. If you tell that I am a graduate in India, it's not a big deal at all. You're literally that's the minimum education you will need to even live in that society, right? I mean that's minimum. Um, I mean, for any kind of decent work life, or career, you need to go beyond graduation. Nobody just graduates and stays that way, right? So then you say, okay, I'm going to get a postgraduate. Um, there also now starts to become a split to say there are some postgraduates that graduate courses that are very specific to a particular field. So it focuses on you getting trained, getting ready for that profession. But there are still a huge number of postgraduate courses which just don't get you there, right? I mean, so some of it becomes very theoretical, some of it becomes very academic, but it does not take you there. Then you start having people saying, okay, I'm a postgraduate. Now, for me to be prepared, I'm going to need this extra course, and then you enroll in data science from Harvard, right? I mean, I'm not able to answer the question of why aren't some institutions are doing it. To be fair, I mean there are institutions that are really pushing hard and challenging status quo and saying, look, we should do a better job in getting people uh, to have a more rounded education to get them a little bit ready for the outside world. But I don't know how organizations kind of justify, and let's if you think about U.S. universities, some of them justify six-figure tags to student debt without really getting people skilled in a sense, right? I mean, um, and I think that certainly needs a little bit of a shake. But I think it's slowly happening. I'm not at the pace at which it should. It's slowly happening. Again, I think this pandemic is probably going to force some of that, right? I mean, I think it's going to force. For example, you're suddenly going to have people saying, either I don't have a job or this does not pay me enough. So because you've given up the whole experience of being in a campus, right? If I'm going to be at home and I'm going to study, it's not because of the experience of being in a campus and surrounded by similar folks. It's now going to become I'm studying because I need to reach a certain point, whether in terms of skills or technology or whatever the case might be, and that gets me ready for the workforce. So sounds bad in the sense that that also means that you lose out on to your point about some of the softer skills. But you could make the argument it's complemented by some other soft skills. Plus, it forces the conversation to say, I don't think I can keep students any more engaged on something that is just theoretical, because what else am I then giving, right? I mean, because then it will literally become knowledge for the sake of knowledge, without the application. And sometimes people justify it when you talk about the full college experience, right? I mean, which people are not going to get. So who knows? This just might force curriculum to be relooked at.
And plus, I mean, I think what we've learned is you can't just do a heavy dose of learning and then
Yeah,
expect to have a career for 40 years. You have to be a continuous learner. And so this
yeah.
idea of going to college, figuring out everything you need to know, and then applying that, uh, it's almost like maybe the school needs to focus more on how to learn as opposed to actually teaching specific things.
What to learn? I mean, it's a good thing you brought up, because my family has been involved in education. We run a couple of schools. There's a nursery. There is a B.Ed. B.Ed is Bachelor's of Education, so you need that minimum to teach. A B.Ed college, a regular college, um, and I often have these debates with whenever I'm back home, with teachers over there, when they're trying to impose a certain aspect of their thinking, right? And I keep going back to something that I felt at some stage, thankfully, I don't know whether it was my parents, whether it was my sisters, whether it was my teachers. At some stage, there was a lot of discussion about, I don't necessarily want to tell you what to think. I want to teach you how to think, right? How do you take in data or take in information or knowledge, and evaluate yourself, right? Rather than me telling you this is good and this is bad, right? So very important. I totally agree, and I don't think I also agree that colleges don't do enough, and I think they have, according to me, fundamentally been lazy about innovating. They all talk about it a lot nowadays, because it's so, there's so much happening in the social media. But I would really love to know how it's kind of trickling down to the teacher who's using the same knowledge that he or she had garnered 30 years ago, right? I mean, um, I like the idea of teachers being asked to requalify as teachers. We have that concept over here for doctors, for example. Um, I might be wrong about how often, but I understand that doctors need to take certain tests every few years. So you need to study, make sure you're getting you're picking up the latest stuff. I think uh, teachers should be forced to do that. To make sure that things that they're teaching are not redundant, mundane, and just out of context in today's world. I mean, just to give I passed. I did my chartered accountancy in 1996. I joined KPMG, right? Um, the of course, it was not, the technology was not as advanced, but we were in laser printers and stuff like that. There was curriculum within our course which involved understanding how a dot matrix printer works, and it was insane, right? I mean, so I suspect, I mean, that might have been an aberration, but I don't think it is. I think you start to really closely look at some of the stuff that people are being taught or being asked to understand. I think you'll be surprised. So I like the idea of teachers being, courses being revised and teachers being asked to clear certain exams before they can be eligible to to give that. At the end of the day, that's what would create nations. Everything else is after that, right?
And what do you think about integrated curriculums that are more practical? I mean, like math, is taught in such an abstract way, but has like key applications to everyday problems. I mean, take two loan agreements and see which one's actually going to be, which one is going to cost more or
Eh,
less,
Yep.
things like that.
And that does not, I mean, that is not, I absolutely agree with you. And that's not even limited to uh, to 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 graduates. Mm, mm, I know of an instance where um, somebody went back to do a PhD in accounting in a top school in Houston, top school in Houston, extremely prestigious program. 6 months into it, she said the stuff that is being taught has, I mean, this is stuff that no accountant in the world is using. It's all very nice and having been in that profession for 14, 15 years before she went back to school, she knew what she was talking about. And there was this frustration that the amount of, whether it's calculus or whether it's the amount of mathematics, for example, that was being imparted with, with, with accounting and audit and compliance being kind of seemed like to be the side gig. There was so much focus on the theory and modeling and stuff like that. It was just frustrating, right? I mean, and she said, it's if I was starting my career and and that still could make sense in the sense that okay, I haven't quite figured out what I want to do. But if you're looking to do a PhD in accounting, then you really you want to talk about accounting standards, you want to talk about trends, you want to talk about where the world is going, you want to talk about how macro economic events should impact or not impact accounting. Those are the things you want to talk about, but that was not being discussed. And this is literally in a top school, in a top university in Houston. I can't even imagine what would happen if to some of the not so um, prestigious schools.
Well, that prestige cuts both ways. The really prestigious professors maybe don't ever do any real work, and then the
And
people.
I go back to that point about they should be made to take tests to make sure they understand the real world and they're not living in the world that they graduated from 30 years ago.
And in that non-prestigious school, the professors may not be earning enough, so they had to do real work on the side,
Yeah,
and they actually may be teaching
that's
more practical stuff.
that's interesting that you said that, and it's interesting you said that because uh, there was when I was at KPMG, my first stint at KPMG, I was thinking about coming to the US. I used to live in Bangalore. Coming to the US to do an MBA, and this partner from KPMG told me, look at the tier. Don't look at the Ivy League schools. Look at the next level of schools because the professors are going to be a lot more committed to your learning. And you. So it was, and I had not thought about it as much till you kind of mentioned it. But he had made that point 24 years ago, right? I mean, he said that, and I think he went to. I want to say he went to Stanford or Stanford or either Stanford or how I don't know where he went. He went to one of these big schools. So, but but he said the same thing that you're saying. You're saying that I had professors who were like famous professors, but they really didn't care to. They were really more interested in doing their pet project. Getting onto TV, books. They were doing all of it. So all sounds very exciting, but what does it do for me? Yeah.
Well, and in terms of like inspiring people about what's possible and about really improving society, I mean, I feel like, for example, from a technical standpoint, I feel like we know how to produce enough food that everybody in the world could eat.
Yeah.
But there's some logistical and political and sociological and other issues there. I mean, how do you kind of inspire people to actually solve those types of problems? and actually change life and make it better?
I, for all its flaws, at the end of the day, I think I do believe that uh, democracy forces leaders to have a certain behavior that might sometimes be counterproductive to their own interest, right? So I think about it, if I'm thinking about it in a few steps, right? So I would make the argument, you have the democracy, and the second piece then becomes, you need to make sure that everybody has a say, right? I think you you feel like the decision makers end up addressing gaps of those people who have a say, right? So if there is a large enough say of any group, I promise you there'll be leaders who will address that, right? And I think um, so. Let's take some of the news that's coming out of India at the moment, right? There's some news about that even during this time there was a certain amount of grains that that rotted, right? And the government was not. So I'm sure there was some of it was supply chain problems, uh, but I think some of the indifference to that is driven by whether those people have a loud enough voice on the voting ballot in this case for me to do something about it. I don't think I don't think it's today that we have realized that there's a supply chain problem to get the food to the last table. I think the world has known this for many years. Um some have done more in terms. Some countries have done more in getting to that point, but there's a gap. Um, and I think the only way is for the disenfranchised and the affected ones to kind of feel differently. There's no, unfortunately, there's no easy silver bullet here. I mean, I always make the argument about decisions are made by those who show up. I'm a big believer in that. So I say this to everybody, and I'll say this now that we're coming into this election season. It'll be, if you don't, I don't care which state who you vote for. Of course, I care, but I don't care who you voted for. But if you decide not to vote, or you chose that day you had a meeting that was more important, not changing it, might be, you do not have the right to criticize. For the next 4 years, you keep your mouth shut, accept everything that the government does, president does, whoever does, right? You've lost the right to criticize because you had a role to play. And in the argument that, okay, let's say Texas is a Republican state and my vote would not have mattered is fallacious because there are enough instances where a Republican state goes Democrat and vice versa. It's happened. And there are enough people who, if you say that, then you're never going to have that change. So, and if you vote, you have the right to complain. And your guy did not, or your guy or your girl does not win, you have all the rights to complain about what the other guy did. And if your guy or girl wins, then hopefully you have access to help him or her govern better. But honestly, this whole supply chain piece, I think it's a political will problem rather than a technology or ability problem, or even an infrastructure problem. I mean, I know of at least two countries where Walmart had gone and in fact had offered to set up over there to create warehouses, which would basically help the local farmers to use those to store, because there was a whole lot of produce that was going waste because there was no freezer facility and stuff like that. But the government in that country just did not allow it, and not. I'm pretty sure it really came down to money. I don't think it came down to them thinking that they have another solution. I don't think they believed in that. I think it was whatever they needed. Walmart was not ready to give. So they are. I mean, if I can get food to the last person in Houston, then why can't I get food to the last person in LA, or for that matter, the last person in Fredericksburg, right? I mean, I think um, it's really about political will, not a question of resources.
And you mentioned about decisions are made by the people that show up and the context of the presidential election. I think one other thing to consider is who you vote for president may actually be the least important choice you make, because you have, your representative, you have your
Yeah.
county, you have your state, and your vote
I would make
actually.
the argument superintendents of schools, right? I mean,
Yes.
if you think about a long-term revolution you want in any society, it's going to start from the next generation. It's not going to happen with your generation, with our generation. It's going to happen with the upcoming generations. That it's any revolution takes that amount of time. You've got to make sure that those people are being given that opportunity to learn how to think.
And also, your vote counts more, right? I mean, in
Yep.
an election with 1,000 votes,
Yeah.
one vote's 1/1,000. With like, 100 million, you're only. And plus, there's a supply chain for presidents too. Trump kind of like kind of is an exception in that
Yeah.
result. But most people who are presidents were maybe a senator or a governor, and before that,
Yeah.
they were like a representative or something.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, did you have any additional comments? I feel like we could probably talk all day,
Yeah.
actually.
No, that's good. Let me do this. Will you send me a little bit of a note about what you want, what I can send to some folks, and then they can connect with you.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. I'll send you a note later this weekend, and we'll go from there.
Sounds great. You have a good weekend, man. Thank
Okay,
you.
you too,
Sorry I had to
Vivek.
swing it around. I apologize. Huh?
Oh, no worries. Thank you so much.
No, anytime. Take care. We got to catch up once all this nonsense dies down.
I agree.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.